The people sent in to clean up Chernobyl's radioactive mess barely survived the work, and some didn't. A massive blob of radioactive material sits under the plant, so deadly that just standing near it for a minute could kill, and black fungus is growing inside the abandoned reactor, feeding on the radiation itself. These are disturbing photos taken inside Chernobyl after the disaster. In 1986, right after the Chernobyl disaster, a group of people known as the liquidators were called in to clean up the radioactive mess. This photo shows some of them at work, and if you look closely at the bottom, you'll see these strange white streaks on the film. Those are actually caused by radiation. A lot of these workers were not trained specifically for this type of work. Some were firefighters and soldiers, but there were also regular people thrown into the fire. They didn't have much protective gear, so some of them had to improvise with whatever they could find, like leather and lead plates. They worked in insane conditions, dealing with radiation levels that would have made most people collapse, and a lot of them ended up seriously sick later. Some died from exposure, and despite all that, they kept going, trying to contain one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. This photo shows one of the most infamous spots inside Chernobyl, the Elephant's Foot. Right after the 1986 explosion, a lot of the molten reactor core sank beneath the plant, and what formed was this massive wrinkled blob of radioactive sludge made from melted fuel, metal, sand, and concrete. It got its name because, as you can probably tell, it kinda looks like the thick, wrinkly skin of an elephant. Back when it first formed, it was insanely deadly. Just standing nearby for a few minutes would kill you. To even get a picture, people had to bounce cameras off mirrors so no one had to actually get too close. The heat was so intense it was literally burning through the floors beneath it. Nowadays it's cooled down and isn't instantly lethal, but it's still one of the most radioactive things on planet Earth, sealed off deep in the plant. What you're looking at here is a black fungus that's been growing in various parts of Chernobyl. It grows toward radiation. The fungus is called, let me see if I can pronounce this right, Cladosporium sphaerospermum. This is a photo of it spreading on the walls of the reactor's damaged areas. It contains melanin, the same pigment that gives human skin its color, but in this case, it seems to help the fungus feed on radiation. It's almost like it's photosynthesizing, except instead of sunlight, it's using deadly gamma rays to grow. Experiments have shown that the fungus actually grows faster when exposed to radiation. Most life would die instantly in that environment, but this stuff is growing just fine. Scientists are now looking at it as a potential tool for radiation protection, maybe even for astronauts on long space missions where radiation is, of course, a huge problem. This is a comparison between what frogs are supposed to look like in the forest of Chernobyl and what they look like now. Parts of Chernobyl, scientists discovered something really unusual: eastern tree frogs with completely black skin. Normally these frogs are green or maybe brownish, but in radioactive zones a lot of them had turned jet black, a condition called melanism. Researchers think the frogs are producing extra melanin to protect themselves from harmful UV rays or even radiation. They're still not entirely sure whether radiation triggered genetic changes or just made the frogs crank out more melanin, but it's obvious the disaster played a role. Some of the most haunting images of worn down abandoned places you'll ever see have been taken in Pripyat. The amusement park is probably the most famous. It never actually opened. It was scheduled to launch just days after the Chernobyl disaster, so no one ever got to actually use it. Today, the Ferris wheel is still standing, rusted and motionless, with the empty frames of bumper cars and a carousel sitting nearby. Everything is decaying, rusted to hell, and completely frozen in time. Picnic tables and benches have been left empty, pathways are cracked, and weeds and small trees have started to take over the area. All this was designed for crowds. Spaces for families, areas for kids to play. It's hard, not to feel slightly somber looking at these images. Reddit user Daddy Sprinkle shared this image here. Do you notice anything? Aside from the guy standing in the picture, obviously, there's a figure crouching in the grass behind the man. The thing is, nobody knows what this figure is. The Reddit user said the picture was taken by his father's girlfriend while they were hiking in the Rocky Mountains, Colorado. The image shows his dad standing outdoors, seemingly alone, but when they looked closer, they spotted the odd figure in the background. What's extra odd is how short the thing seems to be. The grass is not very tall. According to Daddy Sprinkle, no one was around when the photo was taken. His dad had just come from the area where the figure is, and he said that it was completely empty. His girlfriend also said she didn't see anyone standing behind him at the time. And if you think this is just some glitch of the camera, well, we do have some movement. This was a live iPhone photo, meaning it also captured a short video clip. Take a look at this. Now we see the things slightly shifting from left to right. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but the figure does have a certain alien type quality about it, doesn't it? It's the squatness of it. Kind of reminds me of E.T. Paul and Evelyn Trent lived in a small farm just outside McKinville, Oregon. One evening in May of 1950, Evelyn saw something shiny in the sky and called out to Paul. He grabbed his camera and took 2 photos of what looked like a metallic disc flying through the air. A few weeks later, their local newspaper ran the photos, and then Life magazine picked them up. From there, it became one of the most talked about UFO sightings in the United States. Kodak analysts checked the negatives and found no signs they'd been tampered with. And remember, these were the days long before digital editing was even a thing. The lighting and shadows were also consistent with the time of day the Trents claimed to have taken them. Skeptics have tried for decades to explain this away, saying it might have been a thrown pie tin or a model on a string, but no one's ever recreated the photos in a convincing way. The Trents didn't profit from the attention either, and they never changed their story. Even into old age, they stuck to what they said they saw. Notice anything strange about this image? What if we zoom in a little? Well, that's strange, isn't it? Reddit user solid_ace6 shared this image saying that the photo comes straight from NASA's own website. It was taken long before things like Starlink satellites were even around. Clearly, we can see 5 silvery, circular-shaped objects lined up in space just beyond Earth. Judging by how big they look next to the planet, whatever they are, they're pretty big too. So what are these things? I have no idea. I can't find any info on this image beyond this post. So what do you all think? Share your thoughts down below. Starting in the early 80s, people living in the Hasdalen Valley in central Norway began reporting strange lights in the sky. They were glowing orbs, sometimes white, sometimes yellow or red, and they'd hover, shoot across the valley, or slowly drift along the mountains. They'd appear randomly, day or night, and sometimes stick around for over an hour. Locals saw them so often that people actually stopped thinking it was weird at all. It just became part of the landscape. Scientists got involved in 1983 when a group of researchers from Oxford University set up a project aptly named Project Hasdalen. They brought in proper gear, cameras, radar, and electromagnetic sensors, and they did catch the lights. What they found was that the lights didn't behave like any known aircraft or natural weather phenomena. Some would split in 2 or suddenly disappear, others would shoot upward at impossible speeds. The radar showed solid objects too, not just energy or reflections. They also analyzed the area and found elevated levels of rare elements like scandium, which isn't usually found there. Some theories say the lights are plasma, caused by maybe a rare reaction between the minerals in the valley and underground water, but they can't fully explain why this seems to only happen in this part of the world. The lights are still being seen today, not as often as they were in the 80s, but still seen. There's a permanent observatory in the valley now, running 24/7, but after over 4 decades, nobody has a clear answer. In late August of 1951, 3 science professors from Texas Tech, Dr. W.L. Ducker, Dr. A.G. Oberg, and Dr. W.I. Robinson, were sitting outside one evening when they saw this string of glowing lights flying across the sky in a tight V shape. The lights were bluish-white, totally silent, and moving very fast. The formation looked too precise to be birds. And a few days later, 18-year-old Carl Hart Jr., a student at the college, managed to take 5 photos of these lights. His pictures were sent to the Air Force and eventually became part of Project Blue Book. They didn't dismiss the case, but their best guess was that it might have been birds reflecting streetlights, but even they admitted Hart's photos didn't match that theory. They couldn't reproduce the effect. People kept seeing the lights for weeks. They always moved in formation. Multiple witnesses described the same kind of motion. The professors gave statements and held on to their version of events. None of them changed their story. The Air Force never reached a solid conclusion, and it's one of the few cases from that era they left open. What you're looking at here is a mysterious drone swarm that Coast Guards in New Jersey caught trailing their ship back in December. Not sure if you're all aware, but this was during a huge wave of weird drone sightings in the area. A Coast Guard crew was patrolling the Atlantic near New Jersey when they noticed that they were being followed by drones. One of the crew stated, "We were out there to see if we could spot any drones because of all these sightings. Well, we found some drones, or more accurately, they found us. The drones appeared out of nowhere around 9 p.m. and stuck with the boat for about 15 minutes. Even when the vessel changed course, the drones followed." The crew member went on to say, "Commercial airplanes don't move like that. We've been out on the water when planes were coming in for landings in New York, and trust me, you can tell the difference. We're not idiots. We know what drones look and sound like." Then the drones banked left toward the shoreline and disappeared. When asked about it, White House spokesman John Kirby gave the usual government answer, which was basically nothing to see here. "We assess that the sightings to date include a combination of lawful commercial drones, hobbyist drones, and law enforcement drones, as well as manned fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, and even stars that were mistakenly reported as drones." He also said the Coast Guard likely mistook airliners for drones. The guardsman was not having this. He doesn't pretend to know what they were exactly, but he's clear on one thing. They, quote, "weren't the types of drones you can buy at the store. These were government drones." Tina Kalig was just looking out her window in Hill Country Village, Texas, when she spotted something weird walking through her yard. She had no idea what she was looking at. "I was inside and I looked out in the yard and saw an animal right here and thought, wow, what is that?" she said. "It was moving slowly, sniffing around, and then stopped to eat berries off the ground before vanishing." Tina was able to snap a few photos and shared them online with the caption, "Unusual creature in my yard, what is it?" She was hoping someone in the neighborhood had an answer. Some said it looked like a mangy dog, others thought maybe a coyote with some sort of skin disease. A few brought up a local legend about an old mountain lion that's supposedly roamed the area for years, and several people said it looked like a chupacabra, but nobody had a definitive answer. And even experts from the local zoo were just throwing out their best guesses. Back in 2016, ghost hunter Claire Cowell claimed she captured one of the clearest photos ever taken of the infamous Black Monk of Pontefract. The photo was taken inside 30 East Drive in Pontefract, West Yorkshire, widely known as one of the most haunted houses in the UK. Claire said the image shows the, quote, "arm of a ghostly figure in a monk's robe clutching rosary beads." She believed it was none other than the violent spirit said to haunt the house. That night, things had already been strange, too. Claire said, "We'd seen marbles being thrown and we kept hearing taps and bangs," end quote. It was around 11 p.m, most of the team had left and she went into the kitchen alone. "I heard a tap in the hallway at the bottom of the stairs. I took a photo, but I couldn't see anything," she explained. But once she reviewed the image, she noticed the arm. The arm you can see in the photo is not a solid form. It looks like mist. Now, it's kinda hard to tell here, but in the photo, you will notice a mirror on the wall behind the supposed ghostly arm. Based on the position of the figure, you would expect to see a reflection if something was standing there, but there isn't, so that's kinda eerie too. The photo was later confirmed by the home's owner, Bill Bungay, as the most compelling image of the Black Monk he'd ever seen. This isn't the only creepy picture taken in this notoriously haunted home, though. This is another eerie photo taken at 30 East Drive. Ghost hunter Pete Bolton captured what looks like a ghostly figure staring out from a mirror, right in the spot where the infamous Black Monk is said to appear, and the same spot the ghostly arm was photographed. Pete from Manchester took the photo during a ghost hunt and didn't realize what he'd caught until later. "I began taking photos like I usually do at a new location. I was snapping away at random at the house, not anything in particular," he said. One of the shots came out unusually dark, so Pete brightened it up on his computer, and that's when he noticed something strange. "I noticed there was a weird shape in the mirror. No one from the group was downstairs at the time, so it couldn't have been anyone from the group. What he saw was this ghoulish looking figure, clear enough that when he showed it to others without even saying anything, they saw what he did." Pete said at the time that he didn't claim it was proof of the paranormal, but he also didn't dismiss it outright. The mirror sits right near the stairs where a girl named Diane Pritchard, who used to live in the home, was reportedly dragged by some invisible force back in the 60s. In August of 1992, hotel workers in Pitlarky, Scotland were out hiking when they saw something hanging in the sky. It was a massive diamond-shaped object, completely silent, just floating there in the sky. Then a military jet flew by. One of the men had a camera and took 6 photos before the object shot off at high speed. They gave the pictures to the Daily Record newspaper, but the paper passed them straight to the Ministry of Defense. After that, the photos vanished. The public never saw them until 32 years later, when a retired Royal Air Force press officer named Craig Lindsay revealed that he'd kept a copy. It's a pretty amazing image, exactly as described. You see a metallic craft with a jet flying in the background. There were no signs of editing, no wires, nothing that screamed that it was fake. Nick Pope, who ran the UK's UFO desk at the Ministry of Defense, said this was one of the most compelling cases that he'd ever seen. The object didn't match any known military design. It could be a classified US aircraft, but if that's true, no one had ever come forward with proof. The original negatives are still missing. The Ministry of Defense's official files on the case were supposed to be released, but they extended the secrecy order until 2072. In 1918, the Russian Revolution was in full swing, and the Bolsheviks had one last loose end to tie up: Romanovs. Tsar Nicholas II, along with his wife Alexandra, family, and a few loyal staff members were all being held at a house that would become the site of one of the most morbid executions in the country's history. Early in the morning, on July 17th, they were taken to the basement and they never came out. It was brutal, to say the least. Some survived the first round of fire thanks to the jewels sewn into their clothes, but they were finished off afterwards with the spikes on the men's bayonets. This photo shows what the room looked like after the bodies were cleared out. Katharina Datzel was locked away in a German psychiatric hospital in the early 1900s. There's not much known about her diagnosis or how she ended up there, but one thing survived: a photo of her standing next to a life-sized figure that she made out of straw and bits of bedding. It's pretty eerie. She reportedly built the straw man as a form of protest. Some accounts say it was meant to represent the Kaiser, and she attacked it out of frustration and rage. Whether that's true or not, the image itself is disturbing even without the context. And it's not just the straw figure, it's what it came out of. Isolation, powerlessness, a person making something just to have someone or something to direct their anger at. Alright, well, this has been pretty heavy. Let's talk about McDonald's. A different kind of heavy. A heavy in the bowel region. Are you scared of clowns? Even now, some people find Ronald McDonald kinda off-putting, but the first Ronald McDonald wasn't the bright, bouncy clown we know today. Is Ronald McDonald even around? I actually haven't seen him in a long time. Anyway, he looked like this, the first one. Played by Willard Scott, the original Ronald wore a paper cup for a nose, a tray of food as a hat, and just had a more haphazard, thrown together kind of look in general. Makes him slightly more unsettling in my opinion. There's a photo of him grinning directly into the camera holding a burger, looking more like something an AI would spit out if you typed in nasty fast food clown man. This version of Ronald was part of a local TV promotion in Washington, D.C., and it was thrown together pretty fast, as you can probably tell. Fitting though, for McDonald's, fast is kind of their whole thing. Scott had previously played Bozo the Clown, an equally creepy clown. When McDonald's wanted a similar character, he basically slapped some fast food on his head and improvised. And the result was a mascot that kind of looked like he might offer you fries with one hand and then drag you into the sewer with the other. Anyway, McDonald's rebranded Ronald soon after, giving him a full makeover to be more, acceptable for human society. This is Hamida Jandoubi, a convicted killer on his way to his death. He was the last man to be executed by guillotine in France, 1977. Yes, 77. The same year, audiences were flocking to the theater to watch ships fly around in space. As a farm boy learned to wield a lightsaber and harness the power of the Force, folks in France were watching a man's head get lobbed off in the town square. It wasn't actually quite like that. It was not a public batting, but still, that is pretty bonkers. This photo shows Robert Falcon Scott and his team standing at the South Pole, finally reaching their goal after weeks of brutal conditions. They are clearly worn down, frostbitten, starving, and emotionally wrecked. But the worst part, when they got there, they realized they weren't even the first. The Norwegian team, led by Roald Amundsen, had beaten them by over a month. The disappointment in their faces is unmistakable. It's more than disappointment, really. This was the realization that all the pain, the danger, it had all been for second place. and things only got worse from there. The trek back was hell. Edgar Evans was the first to die, likely from a mix of injuries and exhaustion. Then Lawrence Oates suffered from frostbite, and knowing he was slowing the others down, he just walked off into a blizzard to die on his own terms. Scott, Wilson, and Bowers pushed on, but a storm eventually trapped them inside their tent. For 9 straight days, they were stuck, freezing and starving, just 11 miles from the supply depot that could have saved them. All 3 died in that tent. This photo was taken just after the liberation of France in World War II. The woman in the picture is Simone Tussaud being paraded through the streets of Chartres, France. Her head had been shaved, her clothes were torn, and a mark had been branded on her forehead. She's holding her infant, who is fathered by a German soldier. This was not rare. Scenes like this happened across France during what was called the Wild Purge. Thousands of women were accused and punished for sleeping with the enemy. There were no trials, it was really just mob justice. And in many cases, women weren't even collaborating. Some were just accused. Others worked as like maids for them, or had been victims of SA at the hands of German soldiers. But that didn't matter. Crowds gathered, cheered, and sometimes jeered as these women were marched through towns, sometimes barefoot, bleeding and crying. And this was seen as justice at the time, but it was really more like revenge theater. After the US dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, the heat blast was so intense it bleached surfaces. Anything that blocked the light, including human bodies, they left a sort of reverse shadow behind. One of the most haunting examples is known as the human shadow etched in stone. It's the outline of a person who'd been sitting on the steps outside the Sumitomo Bank when the bomb went off. The heat instantly vaporized them, leaving behind a scorched imprint of their body on the steps. The image was captured in photographs taken later by Japanese and American teams documenting the aftermath. The stone itself was eventually moved to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. People sometimes assume this was a literal burn mark from the body, but it's actually the unbleached area, again, where their body blocked the flash. This photograph shows a hospital ward packed wall to wall with children lying in iron lungs, which were these giant steel machines that kept them alive during the worst of the polio epidemic. In the 40s and 50s, polio was one of the most feared diseases in the world, and it mostly hit young people. It could paralyze muscles, including the diaphragm, meaning you couldn't breathe on your own. So the iron lung worked by creating negative pressure to force your chest to rise and fall. Once you were in, you stayed in. Some patients spent weeks or months inside, others spent their whole lives in one. In the photo, you can see the small round mirrors above the patients' heads, angled so they could look around. That was really their only view of the world. What a complete and utter nightmare, especially if you're claustrophobic. The last man to live in an iron lung was Paul Alexander, who died in 2024. He spent the majority of his life in one, but was actually able to become a lawyer and author, all while confined into this metal tube. In the middle of a civil rights protest at the Manson Motor Lodge in St. Augustine, Florida, a group of black and white activists jumped into the motel's segregated swimming pool to protest. What happened next was caught on camera. James Brock, the motel manager, walked over with this jug of muriatic acid, basically industrial strength cleaner, and he started dumping it into the water while people were still swimming. A photographer captured the exact moment he poured the acid, standing over the pool with his jaw clenched. Some of the swimmers scream in panic, unsure of what's happening. At the same time, a white police officer is in the water dragging one of the protesters out by the neck with a billy club. The photo may look staged to some view, but it wasn't. This really happened, and it was broadcast all over the country. Brock later claimed the acid was just to clean the pool, but yeah, it obviously wasn't the case. The image became one of the most graphic examples of how far some were willing to go to keep things segregated. And no, he wasn't charged. Horatio Gordon Robley was a British soldier. He was also a collector of something most people today would consider pretty horrifying. During his time in New Zealand, he became obsessed with mokomakai, the preserved tattooed heads of Maori people. Originally, these heads had deep cultural and spiritual meaning, but by the late 1800s, they'd become novelty items to trade and collect, especially with European colonials who saw them more as circus sideshow type items rather than sacred objects. So in this photo from 1895, Robley sits proudly in front of dozens of these preserved heads mounted on a wall, like some kind of grotesque art exhibit. Some of the heads had belonged to fallen warriors, some were taken from slaves. And sure, the image is disturbing, being that it's a guy with a pretty morbid hobby, but it also perfectly encapsulates how colonials viewed indigenous culture. Instead of respect or understanding, these remains were displayed like souvenirs. Texting and driving is bad enough, but taking a selfie while driving, that's pure recklessness. And in this case, it led to the death of an innocent cyclist. In August of 2014, Matthew Kelly Strand faced charges of negligent homicide in Steele County District Court after a tragic incident. The North Dakota Highway Patrol investigated a collision that resulted in the death of Lisa Knudsen, a cyclist from Portland. Strand had been distracted taking a selfie right before the collision. The selfie was taken at 6:48 p.m. and then analysis of his pickup truck's data showed that he veered over the fog line and rumble strip and failed to brake before colliding with Knudsen, who was riding her bike right ahead of him. Strand first claimed he was distracted by a nearby vehicle and people at a farm, but there was no real confirmation of this. He also admitted to deleting photos from his phone. In defense, Strand's mother argued that Knudsen had shared some responsibility, saying that she'd been biking in a lane instead of on the shoulder, which she deemed was a stupid place to cycle.
Next up, a young couple who took a fatal fall after attempting to capture an adventurous photograph for their Instagram feed. Meenakshi and Vishnu loved to travel, and they loved to document their travels as well, and their trip to Yosemite was no different. The couple climbed up to the top of Taft Point in the national park before setting up their tripod over the high cliff. The photo snapped, and then moments later the couple fell 800 feet down the steep side of the cliff. Their bodies were found days later after tourists had noticed their abandoned camera equipment and alerted the park authorities, who warned other park goers of the dangers of standing on the edges of cliffs in areas that experience such strong winds.
Next up, we have the grenade. In January of 2015, in the Ural Mountains of Russia, two hikers came across a grenade. They didn't know that it was still alive. The men decided to take a selfie posing with it. Pin pulled out and it went off, killing them instantly. The phone with the picture was left intact. But this isn't the only time someone has died in Russia trying to take a picture with unexploded ordnance, especially a grenade. In 2017, a man named Alexander Chechnik sent a picture to several friends of a grenade he was holding with the pin pulled out. The grenade ended up going off, taking out his entire lower body. Police suspected he'd done it as a stunt, planning to reinsert the pin, but just wasn't able to in time.
Next up, we have an incident that took place in 2018 involving a man, a camera, and a bear spotted on the side of the road. On his way home from a wedding, Prabhu Batara spotted an injured bear on the side of the road in India. He stopped the car and hopped out despite warnings of danger from his fellow passengers. Phone camera in hand, he cautiously approached the wounded animal. First mistake. He got closer until he was within arm's length of the animal. Second mistake. The bear struck Prabhu and a fight broke out between the two. At one point, a stray dog stepped in to protect the man from the bear, but it didn't help and Prabhu died before forest rangers could arrive at the scene. In a public statement released by one of the rangers, it was stated that the man had died on the spot, but that the bear was being treated for its injuries.
Alright, word to the wise, do not attempt to climb into animal enclosures at the zoo, especially not with lions, and especially not just to snap a picture of yourself. Yes, this is another animal case. This next story just happened in February of this year. A 38-year-old man at a zoo in India climbed over the fence around the lion enclosure in order to get a picture with the creatures, and guess what happened? He was immediately attacked by one of the lions and lost his life. The incident happened at a zoo in Andhra Pradesh. A worker had actually told the man not to climb the fence, but the guy tried anyway and made it over and into the enclosure this time. Before the caretaker had any time to react, one of the three lions, named Donglapur, pounced on the man and mauled him to death. Now, of course, this is a very unfortunate and sad case. I think the man was under the influence too, but still, I wouldn't think anyone would need to hear this, but apparently some need the reminder: wild animals are dangerous. Don't invade on their space. Nothing good will come of it. And what sucks in situations like this is that the animals end up usually having to pay the price too, even though they're just defending themselves out of fear.
Next up, we have a 21-year-old man who died in Mexico City after attempting to capture an impressive snapshot. Prior to his death, Oscar Otero had been known to post photos to his Facebook, posing next to what he described as impressive items. But unfortunately for Oscar, in 2014, the impressive item he chose just so happened to be a loaded handheld weapon. After a long night of drinking with friends, he pulled out his camera and began posing with the item in the hopes of getting a cool photo for his Facebook feed. Okay, I'm sorry, but I would literally unfriend someone so fast if they posted something like that on their timeline. During his attempt to capture the image, Oscar was playing with ways to hold the weapon when all of a sudden, it went off. A neighbor heard the sound and called police, who arrived on the scene while Oscar was still alive, but unfortunately on the way to the hospital, the young man did die of his injuries.
Some of the most common causes of death while taking selfies are falls, drowning, and accidents with trains. This next incident is one of the latter. A 22-year-old man in Serbia lost his life while attempting to recreate a scene from his favorite movie, Barking at the Stars. He had the idea of running in front of a train, aiming to beat it and be celebrated as a hero, mirroring a scene from the film. But as he dashed in front of the train, he also tried to take a selfie to capture the moment, and sadly the high-speed train struck him with full force. The impact was fatal and he was killed instantly.
Starting off our list today with a volcano selfie to die for. Literally. Earlier this week, a woman died in Indonesia while trying to take a photo on the edge of an active volcano, Mount Ijen in East Java, known for its iconic blue flames. The 31-year-old woman named Huang Lihong had joined her husband on a sunrise hiking tour of the volcano. When the pair reached the summit, she wanted to commemorate the moment, but before the picture could be snapped, Huang slipped and fell directly into the volcano's crater. She died on impact after falling 75 feet into the mouth of Ijen.
One time you should absolutely never take a selfie is while flying a plane, but that's exactly what happened in 2014, leading to the deaths of both men on board. On May 31st, 2014, a 29-year-old pilot named Amrital Singh was flying over Colorado with one passenger, a musician who'd been in town for a show. He'd been taking photos and selfies with his GoPro, which was found at the crash site. There didn't appear to be anything wrong with the plane, so it looked like he'd been distracted, leading to the accident. He likely developed spatial disorientation, lost control of the plane, which went into a stall and spun before crashing into a wheat field down below. On top of these selfie distractions, it looked like Singh hadn't been trained to deal with stalls. His logbooks also didn't show he'd been qualified to fly at night with passengers.
Next up, we have a caddy selfie that almost cost the life of a 30-year-old woman at an Arizona zoo. The incident took place in 2019 when the woman, whose name was not released by the zoo in an effort to protect her identity, decided to sneak inside the barrier of the jaguar cage in order to get a selfie. After making it past the barrier, the woman walked over to the small fence, which was now all that separated herself from the massive animal. As she raised up the arm holding her phone, her other arm was swiped by the jaguar and slashed almost right open. The woman can be seen in a video after the incident rolling around in extreme pain, screaming and crying as the zoo staff attempt to attend to her injuries. Luckily, the event didn't prove to be fatal, just incredibly painful. The woman did later reach out to the zoo and apologize for her actions and for the backlash the zoo had been receiving since the incident. I really hope she learned her lesson, because that whole situation could have gone way worse.
Speaking of that, next up we've got more so-called alien bases on the moon. Scott Waring, who's well known for digging into this kind of stuff, has spent years combing through photos and footage, zooming in on lunar craters and pointing out shapes that don't really look like they belong there. Structures that seem too geometric, too sharp, too out of place to just be random rocks. He's even claimed that some of these objects vanish on later scans of Google Moon, like they were edited out after people started noticing them. One of the most talked about finds is this formation right here, tucked away in the Zeeman crater on the far side of the moon. Waring believes it could be an entrance, maybe to some kind of underground base. The idea alone raises a lot of questions. Is it alien? Is it something secret built by humans and hidden away? Or is it just a weird coincidence of light and shadow playing tricks on the eye? Here's another strange one that Scott Waring flagged, sitting right between Von Kerman and Davison Crater, also on the moon. At first glance, it just looks like an odd formation, but Waring is convinced it's way more than that. On his blog, he wrote, "I found the structure in the center of a crater on Earth's moon. The structure closely resembles a ship from the Transformers movie. The object is definitely interesting looking, with the bulges and shapes that almost look like they were intentional. What really caught his eye is how shiny it appears compared to the rest of the area, almost like it's metallic. He even suggested that this craft might still be intact enough to salvage and maybe, just maybe, be used to travel to other planets in the Milky Way." That's a pretty wild claim to make from a single photo. Still though, when you zoom in on it, it does have that, sci-fi spaceship kind of look. The Calvin UFO is one of those cases that almost disappeared entirely from public view, and who's to blame for that? Well, let's talk about it. Back in August of 1990, two men were walking on the moors above Calvin in Scotland when they noticed a diamond-shaped craft hovering in the sky. They snapped a few photos before the object shot straight up and vanished. The negatives and prints were handed over to the Ministry of Defense, but then the papers never published the story, and the originals went missing. For decades, the case was completely forgotten. It wasn't until investigative journalist David Clark tracked down a surviving print held by retired Royal Air Force officer Craig Lindsay that the image finally resurfaced. Clark had the photo digitally restored and analyzed, confirming that it was genuine. The Calvin UFO has since been called the best UFO photo ever, and it's easy to see why. Was it really a UFO, a secret experimental craft? Who knows, but the fact that it was lost for so long, hidden away in Ministry of Defense files, does kind of make you wonder. This is one of the only remaining images taken at the time of the Kecksburg UFO incident. The Kecksburg UFO crash is seriously one of the weirdest cases in UFO history. On December 9th, 1965, people across 6 US states and parts of Canada saw this massive fireball streaking across the sky over Detroit and Windsor. Then folks in the tiny village of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania said they saw something actually crash into the woods. Witnesses reported seeing blue smoke drifting through the trees and feeling vibrations in the ground. Authorities quickly cordoned off the area and started searching the forest, but officially they claimed they didn't find anything. They said it was probably just a meteor. But that explanation didn't sit right with the people who actually saw it. A bunch of locals who got close to the crash site, they described this huge acorn-shaped object, the size of a small car, partially buried in the dirt. They also described it having strange markings that looked almost like hieroglyphs. Before anyone could get a good look though, the military swooped in, sealed off the area, and removed the object. Was it a secret Soviet satellite, some kind of top-secret US military craft, or something not from this planet at all? On May 21st, 1953, reports started coming in about a UFO crashing in the desert, and supposedly the military rushed in to clean it all up. Arthur Stansel, who was a mechanical engineer with the Air Force back then, said he was part of the team sent to the site. He described seeing a small disc-shaped craft partially buried in the sand, made of this shiny metallic material with no seams or rivets, that was molded out of a single piece. What really freaked people out was what he claimed was next to the craft though, a tent holding the body of a creature. Stansel said it was about 4 feet tall, human-like, wearing a silver metallic suit with dark brown skin on its face. Everything he saw was quickly loaded onto trucks and taken somewhere secret. The craft, the body, and any documented proof, like footage and photographs, were all sealed away. So whatever really crashed in the desert that day will probably remain a mystery. What you're looking at here is a mysterious object known as the Black Knight satellite. The story of the Black Knight satellite starts with some really strange signals that go way back to 1899. Nikola Tesla was in Colorado experimenting with this radio equipment when he picked up transmissions that didn't make any sense. At first he thought they came from the atmosphere, but he later realized they were coming from space. Not long after, an Italian inventor reported picking up similar signals, and a Norwegian engineer named Jorgen Hals picked up something even stranger: radio echoes that returned with huge delays, way longer than they should have. These are now called long-delayed echoes, and even today nobody can fully explain them. Then in 1973, a Scottish researcher named Duncan Lunan claimed he actually decoded a message from one of these signals. According to him, it was a star map pointing straight to the Epsilon Buddha star system. Things got even weirder though ago in 1998 when astronauts on the STS-88 mission photographed a dark, oddly shaped object orbiting Earth. NASA just brushed it off, saying it was probably a thermal blanket that slipped away during the mission, but a lot of people saw something different. UFOologist Jacques Vallée even tried to investigate evidence linked to the satellite, but his findings were supposedly confiscated. Some say the Black Knight could be an ancient piece of alien technology, possibly a time capsule from a lost civilization just silently circling Earth. This is a screenshot from footage taken on the Apollo 16 mission. No joke, I had an old link to this footage on the NASA website. When I clicked on it, I got this. Just a fun little piece of info there. During the Apollo 16 mission, NASA's fifth successful trip to the moon, something really strange was caught on camera. Astronauts John Young, Thomas Mattingly, and Charles Duke were on their way back to Earth when they managed to capture just a few seconds of footage. In it, you see what looks exactly like a flying saucer hovering above the moon. Not some blurry dot. This thing had that classic UFO look, the kind of shape that you'd expect to see in a 1950s B-movie. The clip was filmed with a 16mm camera, running at 12 frames per second, aimed out of one of the command module windows. 4 seconds isn't much, but it's long enough to raise questions about what they saw out there. Now, NASA's official explanations never really satisfied everyone, and the fact that the footage was later harder to find online only added fuel to the fire, of course. Imagine traveling all the way to the moon, about to head home, and suddenly spotting something like that drifting nearby. If it was me, I'd probably never stop talking about it. Take a good look at this. This is the image the Curiosity rover sent back from Mars in May of 2022, but you'd think this image was taken at an archaeological site here on Earth. It looks exactly like a doorway carved into the rock. It's got that sharp rectangular shape, about a foot tall, and almost looks like it leads somewhere. The thing is, of course, nobody from Earth has ever been to Mars, so what are we looking at? Some people immediately thought it could be the remains of an ancient alien civilization, proof that intelligent life once lived out there and left this behind. Scientists and folks at NASA, on the other hand, were quick to say it's probably just differential erosion, where softer rock wears away faster than the harder stuff around it. They also mentioned Mars quakes that could have split the rock in this way, but still, I mean, look at this. It looks pretty uncanny to me. This one comes from the Mars Opportunity rover, and it's kind of wild. A cropped photo shows a rock formation that, when compared side by side with the Neo-Assyrian attendant god statue in the British Museum, well, it looks almost identical. The resemblance is so close, it's hard not to wonder, are we looking at a random rock or something left behind by another civilization? I mean, is it possible that Martians once visited Earth, picked up ideas from us? Maybe it was the other way around, humans carving statues inspired by stuff brought over by alien visitors. Or it's just a rock that, happens to look like an ancient statue. Take your pick. Could astronauts have actually come across alien structures on the moon? Weird shapes, strange shadows, things that don't exactly scream natural rock formations? Some of the Apollo photos really make you wonder. And if images like that did get captured, you can see why NASA might have wanted to keep things quiet. A picture of what really looks like remnants of something left behind could cause a frenzy if spread unchecked. So instead of letting people run wild with theories, maybe they figured it was safer to downplay them. Bury a few photos or explain them away as camera glitches or light tricks. One of the most famous examples is this one right here, nicknamed the Castle. It shows what looks like 3 columns holding up a kind of tower-like shape. Even stranger, it looks brighter than the surface around it, almost like it's reflecting light differently. For a lot of people, this is the photo that first planted the idea of alien structures on the moon. Was it just a glitch in the film, a case of pareidolia, or was this one of the anomalies NASA quietly brushed under the rug so nobody would start asking too many questions? On the night of February 24th to the 25th, 1942, Los Angeles went into full panic mode. Just a few months after Pearl Harbor, the US was on edge about a possible Japanese attack. When military spotters thought they saw an unidentified aircraft in the sky, the response was absolute chaos. The city went into blackout, air raid sirens screamed, and the US Army started blasting anti-aircraft rounds into the sky, over 1,400 shells to be exact. But what were they even shooting at? Well, the next morning, the Los Angeles Times published a now famous photo showing searchlights converging on what looked like some sort of solid object in the sky. Some claimed it was a weather balloon, others said it was just mass hysteria, but UFO theorists had another idea, one you can probably guess. Maybe they were shooting at an extraterrestrial craft. The military, of course, downplayed the whole thing though, first saying there was just an enemy plane, then saying there wasn't, then saying it was, a false alarm. But if nothing was there, why did trained military personnel keep firing for nearly an hour? To this day, nobody really knows what they were trying to hit, and that eerie photo keeps the speculation alive. Now, NASA doesn't usually like to admit when it alters images, but this one is hard to ignore. Back in 1976, during the Viking program, NASA's satellites snapped some of the clearest images of Mars yet. But according to some researchers, they also captured something they weren't supposed to, specifically a set of formations that strongly resembled the pyramids of Egypt. These supposed Martian pyramids were found in the Cydonia region, not far from the infamous face on Mars. For years, independent researchers have claimed that some of these pyramid-like structures appeared in early NASA images, but were later edited out, blurred, or conveniently classified. The idea, of course, being that NASA, or the powers controlling it, didn't want people asking too many questions about possible ancient civilizations on Mars. But NASA says there's nothing to see, just a case of pareidolia, our brains making patterns out of random shapes. But the thing is, NASA has confirmed that they do airbrush images when necessary, usually citing clarity issues. So what if the best evidence of artificial structures on Mars was erased before we ever got a chance to see it? Norway's Hasdalen Valley is the UFO hotspot that nobody really talks about, outside of Norway, that is. Starting in 1981 though, strange glowing lights started appearing in the sky, floating, zigzagging, sometimes shooting off at impossible speeds. Unlike most UFO cases, this wasn't a one-time thing either. These lights were consistent, sometimes appearing multiple times a week. And in 1981, one of the most famous photographs was taken, capturing a glowing orb hovering in the sky. The Hasdalen lights have been studied more than most UFO phenomena. Scientists have actually set up monitoring stations to track them, but still, nobody can agree on what they are. Some theories say it's some weird plasma reaction caused by the valley's unique geology, whatever the hell that means. Others think it could be some kind of military experiment. And of course, there's the idea that these are actual alien craft doing whatever it is aliens do. And yes, these lights still show up to this day. Even with all our modern technology though, nobody can fully explain what's going on in Hasdalen, and that 1981 photo remains one of the best pieces of evidence that something unusual is going on up there. In 1919, an old-school Royal Air Force squadron lined up for a group photo at their base. Cute! But when the photo was developed, there was an extra face in the shot, one that shouldn't have been there. Smack in the middle of the back row, there's this guy who wasn't supposed to be there. Was it the janitor? No, it wasn't. This was a man who multiple men in the squadron swore was their old friend, Freddie Jackson. Problem is, Jackson had died just 2 days before this photograph was taken. And on top of that, his funeral had been held on the same day they snapped the picture. The theory is that Jackson, not realizing he was dead, showed up for the photo just like everyone else. Now, some say this is a case of double exposure, which was a common issue in old photography, but that sounds like a lame explanation to me. This is a pretty clear photograph. It's not like Freddy looks like this faint, ghostly figure. There's clearly a dude standing there. So, to this day, nobody's been able to debunk this one entirely. In December of 1964, French photographer Robert Laseric and his family reported encountering this massive tadpole-like creature in Stonehaven Bay in Hook Island, Australia. Laseric captured several photographs of this creature, which appeared to be up to 80 feet long. The images are pretty spooky, showing what looks like this dark, elongated thing resting on the seabed. Laseric claimed that as he approached the creature, it opened its mouth and moved toward him, causing him to make a quick getaway. Now, skeptics have tried to explain this one away, saying the supposed creature could have been a large mass of marine debris, a deflated skyhook balloon, or just an elaborate hoax, but what do you all think? So in 1969, reports started coming out about a supposed UFO crash in Russia, and this footage here was used in news reports at the time. Here we can see what is allegedly KGB and military personnel inspecting a disc-shaped object at a crash site. These images were later featured in the secret KGB UFO files, a documentary that brought a lot of attention to this incident. Some think that this footage and photographs are evidence of a genuine UFO, that the Soviet government recovered a crashed alien spacecraft. But it's never been proven. There's no definitive documentation of this case, so some think the whole thing was just a hoax. And yeah, it's hard to find solid information on this incident, but for some, that just makes the whole thing more believable. The Soviets weren't really known for being transparent about these things, and it's not hard to imagine they'd want to cover something like this up. To date though, no conclusive evidence has confirmed the authenticity of this footage or the photos. Is this a hoax, or are these images real, but were just suppressed? In 2017, a photograph started getting shared around that some believe showed Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, on a dock in the Marshall Islands after their disappearance in 1937. The image, found in the US National Archives, is supposedly a piece of proof that Earhart and Noonan survived a crash landing and were then taken captive by the Japanese military. Sean Henry, a former executive assistant director for the FBI, has analyzed the image and confirmed that it hasn't been altered or tampered with in any way. Earhart disappeared on July 2nd of 1937 during her attempt to fly around the world. 2 years later, she was officially declared dead. They figured her plane crashed somewhere in the Pacific, but if this photo is legit, it could mean she survived, at least for a while. The woman in the image does kind of look like Earhart, although it is a bit grainy and shot from a distance, and the man has a receding hairline, similar facial features to Noonan. I could see it. In the background, there's also a Japanese ship, the Koshu, towing a barge that happens to be about the same length as Earhart's plane. During NASA's Apollo 17 mission in 1972, astronauts snapped a bunch of photos while exploring the moon. One of those pictures, known as AS17135-20-680, has caught a lot of attention because it seems to show a pyramid-shaped structure on the lunar surface. But what makes it even more suspicious is that NASA later blurred or altered the image in official archives. This has led some to believe they were trying to cover something up, that maybe this image is proof that they found something up there. Others argue it's just a natural rock formation, and what looks like a pyramid is really just the way the light and shadows hit the surface. You know the deal. NASA hasn't officially explained what's in the photo, which is only added fuel to the fire, at least online. Without a clear answer, people have come up with all kinds of theories, ranging from secret space programs to lost alien ruins. Whatever the truth is, the image is still one of the more mysterious photos taken during the Apollo missions, and to this day, it still has people debating what's really up there. On November 22nd, 1963, during the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, numerous photographs and films were taken by spectators. Well, someone showed up in some of these photos and footage, a mysterious figure who would later be dubbed the Babushka Lady. She wore a headscarf and was standing in a pretty prime spot where she would have seen everything go down. But alright, whatever, lots of people were there. Obviously they're gonna be captured on camera. Well, what makes the Babushka Lady so interesting is that she's holding what looks like a camera, meaning she might have captured one of the clearest angles of the incident. Thing is, nobody knows who she was, and whatever footage she might have taken has never been found. The FBI even put out calls for her to come forward, but she never did. Some people think she was just a random bystander, but others actually think she may have had a reason for staying quiet. JFK conspiracies are a rabbit hole, but there are some that say the CIA wanted him dead, and if that's the case, they wouldn't have wanted any images leaking that could potentially incriminate them. Maybe the Babushka Lady and her photos were found, if you know what I mean. Either way, she's still one of the biggest unanswered questions from that day. The Black Knight satellite is a term used to describe a mysterious object believed by some to be an extraterrestrial satellite orbiting Earth. The legend dates back to 1899, when inventor Nikola Tesla reported receiving these unusual radio signals, which he speculated could have been coming from some kind of intelligent source. In 1954, newspapers reported claims by UFO researcher Donald Keyhoe that the US Air Force had detected 2 satellites orbiting Earth, at a time when no known satellites had been launched. Then in 1998, during the STS-88 mission, NASA's first space shuttle mission to the International Space Station, astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour snapped this incredible photo. What we see here is this strange object in orbit, which some claimed to be photographic evidence of the legendary Black Knight satellite. NASA later came out and said that the object was a thermal blanket lost during a spacewalk, but even still, the Black Knight satellite is a popular conspiracy, and some are still adamant that there is some ancient alien probe monitoring Earth, floating around up there, watching our every move.
If you are currently using a friction heater, aka a radiator, or if you ever have, Charles S.L. Baker, pictured here demonstrating his radiator system in 1906 next to his unnamed assistant, is the man whom you should send your thank you notes. Born into slavery on August 3rd of 1859, at the age of 15, Baker began working as an assistant to his father, who was an express agent at the time. It was then that Baker developed his interest in the mechanical sciences. He spent decades perfecting his invention, experimenting with different forms of friction using bricks and various types of metal, and after 23 years, he did it. Charles S.L. Baker invented the first ever friction heating device known to man in the form of two metal cylinders stacked one inside of the other with a spinning wooden core in the center to produce the friction, and subsequently heat. After his success, Baker went on to start a manufacturing business for his heating device, the Friction Heat and Boiler Company, which was established in 1904. His company raised $136,000 in capital, equal to almost $5 million today. Baker went on to marry, and his wife eventually gave birth to a daughter named Lulu Bell Baker. When Charles died on May 5th of 1926, he had revolutionized the scientific industry and had changed the way people view the possibilities of simple friction forever.
You're probably thinking this is an AI-generated image, but this is actually a genuine photograph. The photo was captured in 1903. Standing in the middle is a photographer named James Rickleton. On either side of him are the Kashmir Giants. Can't miss them. James Rickleton was a photographer and world traveler in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He set out to explore different cultures and capture their lives through his camera. One of his most fascinating adventures took him to Kashmir, a region in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. There he met these two men, dubbed the Kashmir Giants. The guy on the left stood at 7'9", the one on the right 7'4". Kinda crazy that a 7'4" guy is being dwarfed by an even larger man. That's just nuts.
Here's a photo of a man with a firm grasp on the importance of space travel, watching the 1968 Apollo 8 space launch with his wife. That rocket's going up. The Apollo rocket, that is. The first ever spacecraft to leave Earth's gravitational sphere, and the first manned mission to reach the moon. Although the crew, made up of 3 astronauts, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, didn't actually step foot on the moon, their spacecraft orbited the lunar body 10 times before returning safely back to Earth. The astronauts aboard Apollo 8 were the first to photograph the far side of the moon, pictured here, and the first to witness an Earthrise, which is like a sunrise but with the Earth.
What an apocalyptic image this is. It looks like a dystopian painting, but it isn't. It's a colorized photograph of the ruins of Stalingrad, one of the biggest, most brutal battles in all of World War II. It took place between August of 1942 and February of 1943. The Germans wanted to capture Stalingrad. It was a key industrial city and would give them control over the Volga River. But the Soviets were determined to defend the city at all costs. And defend it they did. The battle raged for months, with both sides suffering huge losses. Soldiers fought in the streets, buildings, factories. Some of the most intense combat happened house to house. The turning point came in November of 1942, when the Soviets launched a massive counterattack encircling the German forces. This operation, called Operation Uranus, trapped the Germans inside the city with no way to escape. The German troops eventually couldn't hold out, and in February of 1943, they surrendered.
I'm pretty positive every one of you watching this video has heard of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that sank just 4 days after its maiden voyage began, but I bet you haven't seen this photograph. For context, approximately 1,500 people died on April 14th of 1912 after the Titanic struck an iceberg around 2 a.m. and became completely submerged underwater in less than 3 hours. While not a guarantee, those who made it onto the ship's lifeboats did have a higher chance at survival. This photograph shows the Titanic's collapsible lifeboat D, which had been lowered from the port side of the large vessel as it went down. The lifeboat was rescued by the RMS Carpathia, another transatlantic ship, around 7:15 a.m. Ironically, 6 years after rescuing the Titanic survivors after their escape from a sinking ship, the RMS Carpathia would also sink after being struck by a German U-boat.
Oh, mirror selfies, so rarely do they work. This is one of those rare cases. Did people take mirror selfies in the 1920s? Well, this Japanese couple did. This photographer snapped a picture of him and his wife sometime in the 1920s. We don't know the names of these people or the exact date the photo was taken. The only info I could find was that a photographer named Hamish Campbell, who'd been based in Tokyo, came across the photo in 2014 while searching through an abandoned home. On the second floor of the home, Campbell had come across a closet that had once been used as a darkroom. There he found hundreds of negatives, including the image you see here. They were all taken by the man in the picture. Other photographs included his wedding, the day-to-day lives of the family, hangouts with neighbors, and pictures like this here of his pet monkey. Yeah, I think this is just a cute one. Good way to end things off.
Roberta Louise Gibb, better known as Bobby Gibb, seen here without a number after completing the Boston Marathon, was the first ever woman to run the entirety of the Boston Marathon in 1966. Prior to Bobby's participation in the event, the longest amateur athletic union sanctioned race for women was only 1.5 miles, and even after Bobby's unofficial run, the Boston Marathon didn't open up a women's division for the race until 1972, 6 years after Bobby became the pre-sanctioned era women's winner in 1966. Prior to becoming the first woman to participate in the race, albeit unofficially, Bobby trained for 2 years, covering as much as 40 miles per day. Prior to the race, she had actually requested to join as an official participant, but her request was denied due to the fact that, according to the race director, Will Cloney, women were not physiologically capable of running marathon distances. On the day of the race, Bobby donned her brother's Bermuda shorts and a large hoodie and waited until about half the runners were on their way before joining in. Partway through the race, moved by the support of her fellow runners, she removed her hoodie and revealed herself as a woman. When she reached the end of the race, 3 hours, 21 minutes, and 40 seconds after her start time, the government of Massachusetts, John Vlope, was waiting to shake her hand.
Pictured here is a woman named Ina Squire Brown. She was a professional dancer and, as you can clearly see, soon to be married. Her fiance was Royal Air Force Officer J.C. Martin. What's incredible about this image is when and where it was taken. November 5th, 1940 in London. The photo was colorized a couple years back. All that rubble you see on the lawn, that was part of her home, which had just recently been bombed. And the craziest part was that the bombing had been going on for months and would continue on for months. On September 7th of 1940, the Germans began dropping bombs on English towns and cities in what was referred to as a blitzkrieg, which translates to lightning war. And for 57 consecutive nights, the bombs continued to fall. London was hit the hardest, but this was happening all over the country. So this photo was taken in the midst of all that. An image that perfectly captures the strength and perseverance of the greatest generation. Despite the chaos, the uncertainty, their home crumbling around them, and by that I mean their city and by extension the entire country, Ina Squire Brown, pictured here with her father and neighbor, had smiles on their faces and were going on about their lives. They kept calm and carried on.
In 1921, Elizabeth L. Gardner, pictured here in the pilot seat of a Martin B-26 Marauder, became one of the first American female pilots to serve in a world war. She had been trained by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets, who later went on to command the B-29 aircraft that dropped the first atom bomb on Hiroshima. During her time as an active member of the Air Force, Gardner flew many medium-sized bomber planes, as well as aircrafts that towed aerial targets. In 1939, the WASP organization was formed, WASP being an abbreviation for Women Air Force Service Pilots, after a woman named Jackie Cochran wrote to the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, suggesting the idea of using female pilots in non-combat missions. Gardner joined the organization, which eventually disbanded in 1944. In 2009, after Gardner's many years of service, she and the remaining living members of the WASP organization were recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal for their service, one of the oldest and highest civilian awards given out in the the United States.
This photograph was also snapped in the midst of the London Blitz of 1940, a milkman walking through mounds of rubble to carry out his deliveries. War or not, people still needed their milk. This one was taken by a photographer named Fred Morley on October 9th, just a month after the attacks began. Now, although this photo was genuinely taken at the time, right after a bombing the previous night, it is somewhat staged. See, the Ministry of War wanted to keep everyone's morale high, which was not an easy task given that the Germans were destroying people's homes on a nightly basis. So photographs of the destruction were often censored or just kept out of newspapers altogether. Photographer Fred Morley was frustrated by this. Not only did he feel the need to document what was going on, but he felt that people deserved to see what was truly happening as well. So he compromised. Morley grabbed his assistant, dressed him up as a milkman, and had some firemen who were working on bridges nearby pose in the background, and then snapped this now iconic photo. It showed the destruction left in the wake of the previous night's attack, while also sending an uplifting message to the people of England that they weren't going to let the war break them. Another deleted Reddit user posted these two images. One zoomed into the china cabinet in the background. That reflection in the glass isn't the person who took the picture. The Reddit user said that during the pandemic she stayed at her aunt's house along with her brother, his girlfriend, and the girlfriend's daughter. She said she'd never experienced anything clearly paranormal in that house or anywhere else in her life. She wasn't a hardcore skeptic, but she didn't really have any reason to believe in the paranormal either. But she said her mother, sister, and her brother's girlfriend all claimed to have strange experiences over the years, both in that house and in her parents' old home. While she hadn't seen apparitions herself, she did say she'd experienced things that were hard to explain. Well, this photo was taken in a room near the main stairwell. Her brother's girlfriend and her daughter snapped it before leaving the house. When they took a look at the photo later, they noticed what looked like a person's reflection in the glass of the china cabinet. Nobody recognized who it was, and nobody had been standing where their reflection would show up in the glass like that. Up next, we have the Blackpool Beach entity. This has become a pretty notorious image online, shared by Tiny Professor 9680 on Reddit. It shows two brothers hanging out at Blackpool Beach in Lancashire, England. Tiny Professor posted the picture about 9 months back, but his friend had shown them the photo, which was taken in 2016. Now, you may be wondering, well, what's so special about this picture? Looks pretty mundane. Well, look between their legs. A ghastly looking face looks to be poking out between them. It has a sickly greenish complexion with yellow eyes. Not what you'd ever want to see crawling around the boardwalk at the beach. The picture was taken by the boy's mother, and they were all adamant that there was nobody else with them at the time. By the way, I don't know, am I the only one who kind of thinks this looks like a zombified version of Miley Cyrus? Rajiv Gandhi had been Prime Minister of India from 1984 to 1989. And on the night of May 21st, 1991, he was campaigning ahead of the general election. The picture you're looking at here was taken at his last public appearance. At 10:10 p.m., a press photographer named Haru Babu took what would become the final photographs of Gandhi. In the images, Gandhi appeared relaxed, smiling, greeting people. Not knowing what happened seconds later, you wouldn't think much of these images. But standing amongst the crowd, captured on camera, was the woman who was about to take his life, as well as several others in the crowd. The woman was later identified as 22-year-old Kalivani Rajaratnam, a member of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or the Tamil Tigers, a militant group from Sri Lanka known for the type of attacks that were about to be carried out on this day. Rajaratnam approached Gandhi, bending down to touch his feet, a traditional gesture of respect, but unbeknownst to everyone in the crowd, hidden under her dress were explosives. When she detonated the device, the blast killed Rajiv Gandhi, the photographer, and at least 14 others instantly. Here we see a group of friends lying on some grass, waving drinks, just enjoying themselves, but when you look closer, some people notice something strange. In the window of the house directly behind them, there appears to be a ghostly figure, possibly holding a baby, leering out at them. The picture was taken in a small town called Wem, and that abandoned house is pretty famous, or rather infamous, for its ghostly activity. The photo was taken by Natasha Oliver in 2010. It was after a World Cup match. Someone realized there was a weird figure in one of the photos, and we thought it was kind of freaky, Natasha said. She later posted the image to Facebook, and then it started circulating online, but this is not the only ghostly image taken in the town of Wem. This is one of the most infamous pieces of ghost photography in history. In 1995, amateur photographer Tony O'Reilly was documenting a fire that had broken out at Wem Town Hall. When he developed the pictures, one of them appeared to show a young girl in an old-timey dress lurking in the doorway of the burning building, staring straight into the camera. O'Reilly insisted he hadn't doctored the photo, and a lot of people became convinced that the figure was the ghost of a girl named Jane Churm. The story goes that Jane had accidentally started a fire in 1677 by dropping a candle, which nearly destroyed the entire town. The photograph got a lot of attention, and it boosted tourism too. Suddenly people were flocking to town. Bakeries started selling ghost-shaped cakes, and the town even added a note to the road sign calling it Ghost Town. But in 2010, a local Wem man noticed that the ghostly girl had an uncanny resemblance to a girl in a 1922 postcard. So had O'Reilly actually tampered with the photo after all? Maybe. Maybe not though. The legend hasn't completely gone away. Tony O'Reilly passed away suddenly in 2005, never having admitted that his ghost photo was a hoax. Pictured here is of course John Lennon signing a book for a fan, Mark Chapman, who's standing in the background. That same man would end John Lennon's life just hours later. The photo was snapped on December 8, 1980, outside the Dakota apartment in New York where Lennon and Yoko Ono lived. Chapman had a firearm in his pocket when the photo was taken, but he couldn't go through with it right away. He'd been waiting outside the Dakota all afternoon, watching, getting his nerves up. After the signing, he spent the next several hours on the sidewalk reading The Catcher in the Rye, the book he was obsessed with, preparing himself for what he called his statement. Chapman's obsession with Lennon had been building for months. He idolized him, but he'd turned on Lennon after becoming a born-again Christian. Suddenly, he was convinced Lennon was a phony, preaching peace while being rich and out of touch. And that meant, in his eyes, that John Lennon had to die. For some reason, he thought killing Lennon would give his life meaning. At 10:49 p.m., Lennon and Ono returned to the Dakota, where Chapman was waiting. He fired 5 rounds, hitting Lennon 4 times in the back and shoulder. This next photo was taken by a woman named Denise Russell. Pictured here is her grandmother, who lived on her own until she was 94 when her health started to decline and she had to move into an assisted living home. At the end of her first week there, the facility held a picnic for residents and their families. Denise's mother and sister were there, and her sister took a couple of pictures that day. One of those photos, taken on Sunday, August 17, 1997, shows her grandmother sitting at the picnic. It looks like a pretty ordinary family photo. Nobody noticed anything unusual at the time. It wasn't until Christmas Day in 2000, after her grandmother had passed away, that someone spotted something. While browsing through loose family photos at her parents' house, Denise's sister handed her the picture and asked who she thought the man behind her grandmother looked like. It took a few seconds for it to sink in. The man standing behind her grandmother appeared to be her grandfather, who died back in 1984, 13 years before this photo was taken. A now deleted Reddit user posted this next image with a caption reading, "A few years ago, an older family member of mine went on one of her regular hikes. The trail she takes runs through a fairly remote area on the side of a mountain with no buildings nearby and very few people ever around. She took some photos and later posted a few of them on Facebook, as older people tend to do. Everything seemed normal at first, but then people started commenting on one of the images, asking who she was walking with, but she insisted that she'd been entirely alone. She looked at the photo again, and that's when she noticed it, a figure in the distance." Now, looking at this image, you do see what looks like a figure standing in the bottom right corner, but it's so far away and hard to make out, there's nothing all that unsettling about it. But zooming in, and that hazy-looking figure turns out to be a lot more ghoulish. Pale gray skin, its eyes and mouth pure black. Just who or what exactly is that thing? This image was shared by the Zom Behind You on Reddit. He'd been finishing up his shift at Target when he snapped this picture. Being dark and empty, the store had a bit of a liminal space kind of vibe. I guess that's why he wanted to capture it on camera. After taking the photo, the Redditor and his manager started walking out of the store, and they heard a sound they'd never heard before. At first he thought it might be an alarm, but it didn't really sound like one. It was closer to the sound of a phone ringing. Around the same time, the self-checkout light turned on by itself. Both of them were pretty shaken up at that point, and they left right away. When they looked at the photo later, they also spotted the shadowy figure standing in the middle of the aisle there. they hadn't seen anything there initially. Well, it doesn't get much more apocalyptic than this picture. In one of the schools in Pripyat, there's a room where the floor is just covered with gas masks. The filters have been looted by people looking for tiny bits of silver inside. What's weird though is that these masks were barely even used. A week before the disaster, students had been trained on how to put them on, but when the meltdown happened and people were being evacuated, they were told not to wear the masks. But why? Well, the communist leadership was worried that if people were told to put on gas masks, they'd panic, i.e. everyone would know there was a serious mess up. So to hell with people's health, the masks were all left behind. Pripyat Hospital, officially known as Hospital Number 126, treated people immediately after the Chernobyl disaster. In the hours following it, dozens of firefighters, plant workers, and first responders who were exposed to high doses of radiation were rushed here for urgent care. Their highly irradiated clothing was then hastily dumped in the hospital's basement, which is now one of the most dangerously contaminated areas in Pripyat. The most critical patients were later transferred to a specialist hospital in Moscow, but now 126 sits completely empty and decaying. Equipment sits rusting in the rooms, peeling paint flakes off the walls and the floors are cracked. Beds are still in the wards though, with some torn sheets or medical supplies left behind. The maternity ward, that's especially eerie. It's got cribs still sitting in place and some baby dolls on the floor. Operating rooms have surgical tools left out, and through all of it, nature has started creeping in through the broken windows. These eerie images were taken at one of Pripyat's kindergartens, left exactly as it was when the city was evacuated. The shelves are still filled with toys, some broken, dusty, but mostly intact. Cribs and small beds are scattered around, some with old dolls or stuffed animals still lying on them. The walls are peeling and faded pictures of animals and fairy tale scenes cover the walls. The place is right near the city center, so after the evacuation, nobody came back, at least not permanently. Outside, weeds and small trees are starting to creep in through the windows, and the flooring is cracked and decayed. Even decades later, nothing has been removed aside from the occasional looter. Looking at these images, it's a strange mix of ordinary and unsettling. Normal objects left behind, yet everything abandoned in a hurry. The Azure swimming pool in Pripyat is one of the more unusual abandoned spots you'll see photos of. It was built in the 70s, a large indoor pool, diving boards, changing rooms, a small gym area. After the disaster, the pool stayed open for a short bit, mainly for liquidators and plant workers to wash off contamination, but eventually it was of course completely abandoned. As you can probably tell looking at it, the tiles are cracked, faded, and covered in dust. The pool's upper balcony and viewing areas are crumbling with broken railings and peeling paint. The diving boards hang rusted in place, and the pool is empty, exposing the floor underneath, giving the whole building, just like pretty much everywhere else in Pripyat, a post-apocalyptic vibe. Hotel Policia was one of the tallest buildings in Pripyat, a landmark of the city before the disaster. Built in the 70s, it was meant to host visitors to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, along with engineers and city officials. After the explosion, being that the building was so tall, it was actually pretty useful in the emergency response. The upper floors were used as makeshift observation points and temporary offices for the cleanup operations, and helicopters used the roof to coordinate flights in and out of the city. Today, the hotel is completely falling apart. The lobby's empty, with cracked floors and scattered debris everywhere. Broken furniture, elevator shafts are open and rusting, windows are shattered, and graffiti covers most of the walls. On the outside, the building still towers over Pripyat, but the place is deteriorating, with concrete crumbling and metal corroding.